Welcome to the Soul Script podcast. Here we explore how to unlock the power of our story. Our journey here on earth can be one of deep passion, intentional creation, and personal transformation. The only thing holding us back is our stories. Come and join me as we rewrite and reignite. Before we jump into today's episode, I want to remind you that I am not a medical professional, and the information shared in this podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only. Any products or treatments discussed are based solely on my own personal experiences and should not be considered as medical advice. It is essential to consult with a qualified healthcare professional before making any changes to your health regimen or trying new products, especially if you have any pre-existing medical conditions or concerns. Remember that what works for me may not work for everyone, and individual results may vary. Now, let's dive into today's topic. Hello and welcome back to the Soul Script podcast. I am your host, Lara Titanser, always the same host here on the Soul Script podcast. And as always, I am absolutely excited to be here today and so grateful that you are here today. On this podcast episode, we are going to continue our conversation from our previous podcast episode. And that episode really talked about the steps that we need to take on our physical healing journey before we get to the actual physical part of the physical healing journey. And if that doesn't make any sense to you and you don't know what I'm talking about, please go to the previous episode because there are some things that we need to do, some foundational steps that we need to do so when it gets to the point where we are ready to talk about nutrition, movement, and supplementation, we have the best results possible. And until we address those initial foundational steps, it will not be as effective when we get to the point where we really need to now come into the physical part of physical healing. What makes me qualified to talk to you today? I am not a physician, so nothing I say is, medical advice. All I am doing today is sharing my own personal health journey with you today. We are talking about my seizure journey, which I have talked about multiple times on this podcast in multiple episodes, including on the previous episode, and also I believe on episode number 9. In episode number 9, I talked about it from a really spiritual viewpoint and the spiritual lessons that I have gained from going through this 5-year journey of figuring out what the heck was going on with my body and trying to advocate for myself and for my healing. This episode, I really want to focus on the more physical things, what came along in my journey that helped me to really heal on a physical level. So, our spiritual journey, right? And learning the lessons that has to do with those foundational steps that we need to take, like healing the emotional aspects of our illnesses. And now we're on to the physical. I feel like I've said that 100 times, but I mean, at least you know what we are talking about today. My own personal journey, health journey, is about epilepsy and trying to figure that out. But this episode is not just for somebody who is experiencing epilepsy or experiencing seizures. It can really be for anybody who is experiencing any kind of ailment, especially chronic situations that you've been fighting for a really long time. I greatly empathize with you. I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's about 7 years ago. It could have been longer than that, and have had to deal with the wonderful side effects of Hashimoto's. We'll talk about the supplements that I used, the doctors that I saw, but then also how I had to advocate for myself. And I think that's probably one of the very biggest takeaways. And I think everybody could use that. I just want to upfront tell you that I am going to talk about supplements on this podcast episode that I am affiliated with, but I will tell you the only reason why I am affiliated with these products is because I have seen results for them. So just stating that up front so that you are like not thinking, oh, she's just sharing this story because she is now affiliated with these products. These products came into my life before I even ever was affiliated with them, and I love them enough to now back them, I'll say. Okay, so seizure story. It all started when I was sitting in front of a camera, actually this camera right here, right now that I'm sitting in front of now. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can actually see this video. And I am sitting in front of the same camera, and my husband and I were, filming a video of ourselves to apply for essentially a competition. And so we were sitting there talking about ourselves and why they should pick us. And I remember being in the middle of a sentence when suddenly something just super weird happened to my brain. And I was just kind of like, what the heck just happened? And Andrew puts his hand on my knee and he's like, what? Like, what's going on? And I told him something super weird just happened, like with my brain or something. Like, it was like there was deja vu, but it wasn't deja vu. I don't really even know how to describe it, but it was like that fast. It lasted for maybe 30 seconds, but it was so weird and so unlike anything I had experienced up until that point in my life that I was like, there's something more to that than just kind of like this, a fluttering in my chest or something. Something was going on in my body and I knew it. Well, that was it. I just had that one little weird experience, had no idea what was going on. So I did just kind of brush it aside until the next month. And the next month, I had another one of those really weird things. And once again, I experienced it as kind of like almost this rising in my chest, a feeling of rising in my chest, and then this feeling of deja vu. But the interesting thing about this is I have this feeling of deja vu. It's like something else is happening in some part of my brain. And then the other part of my brain is very present. So I can keep having a conversation with you. I can keep driving. I'm very present, but it's like there's something weird happening in the back of my brain. So I went and started kind of doing my own research on this and just started Googling my symptoms. Now, I do have to say that sitting and becoming obsessed with Googling your symptoms is not always the best thing. We can take it too far. We can become obsessive over it. But at some point, you are going to have to take your health into your own hands. And so this, I think, was my first point of advocating for myself, is I took the initiative to not just be like, that's the weirdest thing in the world, but I'm not going to worry about it. I understood that there was something going on with my body that was different. And so I took the time to Google my symptoms, and there were quite a few things that popped up, but the thing that kept popping up and the thing that, I don't know, just kind of resonated within me was focal seizures. They're just seizures that are just happening in one portion of your brain, and depending on where the seizures are happening, you'll have different expressions of them. So sometimes there are body movements involved. Sometimes it's called like absent seizures, where when you're having them, you're just kind of staring out into space and you're not really there. And maybe you might not remember anything from the last 30 seconds. That's one of the kinds. And then the other kind is like mine, where it's like a deja vu type feeling. And it was actually described like that in every description I found of focal seizures as being a way that you can experience them. So I was expressing this to my husband, and I naturally am somebody who's a little more proactive when it comes to my health. And I think in my youth, I was called a worrywart, and I would worry about things that I felt in my body. In my adult years, I would not call it being a worrywart. I would call it being proactive in my health, and also being somebody who has a heightened awareness of what is going on in my body, and actually learning about human design more. And there's just a very intro human design episode where I just kind of introduce the concept of what human design is. But through my human design, I actually have found that is within my design. And one of my strengths is being able to be very in tune with my body, and actually being able to be very in tune with other people's bodies and what it is that they are experiencing on a physical level and in my own. And so while as a youth, this did look like me just worrying about my body a lot and everything that was happening, as an adult, I know that this is actually a super awesome blessing. And I actually function a lot like a canary in a coal mine. When something's not right, when there's toxins in the water or other things within our physical environment, my body will set off an alarm. I'm highly sensitive to my surroundings, the things I put into my body. So I'm that canary in a coal mine where if something is wrong, I am going to feel it and experience it. And now, going back to our previous episode, I don't identify with it, but I let it go. It's just telling me information. When I choose to bring it on and be like, oh, I have a migraine, I have migraines, or even I have epilepsy. It is part of me. I am epilepsy. That throws me down the rabbit hole of identifying with it and then it being consuming and it really manifesting on a physical level. When now I can kind of see the symptoms and then I say, what information are you telling me? Is it about something physical like toxins, or is it about something emotional about myself? I just am getting the information and then I'm letting it go. I'm sorry, that was a little bit of a side tangent, all to tell you that I started Googling my symptoms. I took my health into my own hands and I talked to my husband and told him that I think it would be best to go see a neurologist because I think this is what's happening. I'm not sure. I want to go have confirmation of it and, be once again proactive if it is this. So I made an appointment with just a local neurologist, and I didn't have, any kind of referral to there or anything. I just made an appointment with a neurologist that was available the soonest. So I walk into this appointment with this neurologist, and he said, okay, so tell me about what's going on. And I didn't want to say, I think I'm having focal seizures, because what I wanted, because I suspected that I was having focal seizures, I actually wanted for him to come to that same conclusion rather than me just, I don't know, I didn't want to just assume I had focal seizures. I wanted to know what the doctor would say about my symptoms. So I told him about my symptoms and what was happening, and that it seemed to be, just about once a month. And he said, well, I don't really know what that would be. It could possibly be maybe some focal seizures. I'm not sure. I think we should do some more testing. Well, that wasn't really an assuring answer. And, it kind of actually scared me because going into somebody who was supposedly a professional and knew about seizures, but it didn't really sound like seizures to him, made me feel like, okay, maybe I am off on the wrong track. So he ordered some EEGs. I think that was it, just a series of EEG tests. And I told him, so are we going to have to get one of these episodes while I am on an EEG? Because honestly, they're not predictable. They just hit out of nowhere and I have no idea when they're going to happen. It's not like, this time of day with this kind of trigger. It's just any time, at least just about once a month though. And he's like, well, we'll just do it and we'll try to get, some kind of information for it. So I go in and I do this test. They hook up all the little wires to me. They have to like scrub my scalp and put this sticky stuff attached to a wire on my head. And then they ran the tests and they didn't find anything. And I was like, yeah, no duh. What were you supposed to see? I told you I wasn't going to have a seizure while we were doing it. And so they just said, well, you're fine and we don't really know what's going on with you. And so I just left that appointment and said, okay, I guess it's really not that big of a deal. Maybe I'm making a bigger deal about it than it really is. So I continued to have these weird things happen to me every single month. And through, kind of journaling about them and keeping track, I actually found out that they coincided with my menstrual cycle. So it was, during that PMS phase where you have some spotting, you're getting grumpy, your breasts hurt, all the things. I would more often than not, actually basically every single menstrual cycle, I would have a seizure. I now know that they're seizures. Surprise. I know that's not a surprise. I suspected that they were seizures though. And so I kind of just understood this, but I didn't do anything about it because it wasn't a big deal. It was, once a month, I had this 30-second thing happen to me. I felt fatigued and kind of dazed afterwards for about 5 to 10 minutes. But other than that, I could hold conversations, I could drive, I could do everything. It didn't really affect my life at all. So a couple years go by with this happening and just still seeing really not any change until it started to change. And what changed is that they really started to become more frequent. And they still happened once a month, but there were like 2 or 3 of them within that time frame, and I would get more and more fatigued each time. So then I was looking to go and get more help, but I did not want to go back to that neurologist, and I had kind of lost my faith in neurologists at that point. And I didn't want to go in and waste my money and have them say, well, we don't really know what's going on. We're going to run some really expensive tests and not find anything. So I decided to go to a nurse practitioner who I knew was very highly recommended. And I actually went in and I asked her about a possible way that we could go about treating them. Because I thought, well, maybe it's because of a dip in my progesterone and a spike in my estrogen. So maybe if we supplement myself with with progesterone, maybe we can stop the seizures. So she was willing to give it a shot. And so she, prescribed me progesterone, and we did it for about 4 months and saw no change. So she said, well, there's really no reason for you to continue on the progesterone. Let's take you off and, just kind of monitor things. My situation continued to get worse though. I was having more and more frequent seizures, and they were becoming longer lasting and had a stronger effect on me. So I would get more fatigued, and they would also kind of change. So sometimes I would have the usual, expression of my seizures, which was that deja vu feeling with a little fatigue afterwards. But then other times it was like all of a sudden I would have this drop in my stomach and I would experience the absolute worst fear that you could ever think of. And it wasn't that anything provoked the fear. It just happened immediately. And if Andrew, my husband, was nearby, I would go over and I would just bury my head in his chest and I'd be like, just hold me, just hold me, just hold me. And I told him that I hoped there would never be a day that I would have to experience that fear not associated with my seizures, because whatever it was that evoked that fear, whatever it was that made me experience that fear in real life, it would be probably the worst thing imaginable. And so they started to turn into that more frequently. Then it even evolved from there, and I noticed that there were other things happening. And one of those main things is that I started to lose my ability to retain memories. And I talked a lot about this in episode 9 because we have that idea where, even if our health slips away from us or our finances slip away from us, we will always have our memories. And I thought, what if I don't even have my memories? And I had kind of this identity crisis, because who are you without your memories? And once again, I talked about this in episode 9, so I won't go into it too far. So if you want to go back there and hear a little more about that part of the journey, you can. But all we really need to know right now is that things were continuing and things were progressing. And this happened for quite a few years. So it's been 5 years since I had my first seizure, almost exactly. And so there were a few years where, I just kind of dealt with it and there was no big deal. But I was still interested in trying to figure out what was going on. And then there were a few years in there where things really started to decline and where I started to lose my memories. And those couple years are years that I don't really remember. And my family actually has to really provoke those emotions out of me by describing what it was like, what was the day like, what did the house look like, what did we do, what was I wearing or whatever. And eventually I could pull it out of my memory banks. So it's actually not that I cannot store memories, which was actually my biggest fear, is that I just wasn't retaining those memories. Actually, what it is that my seizures, I now know this, are located within my hippocampus. And it's the librarian of the brain is what they say. It puts the books away and then it pulls the right books out when you want it. So puts the memories away and then pulls out the right memories. And so my brain was having a very hard time pulling these memories back out because that part of my brain was so fatigued and possibly damaged. My fear started progressing, and the symptoms started progressing from there too. And I would have more of those just like worst fear, just devastating feeling type of episodes. And then I would have episodes where I would be exhausted for an hour or so afterwards and really have a fuzzy mind. And then it progressed to the point where I ended up having a seizure status. And I had like a brand new way of experiencing these seizures. And it was different. And I knew that it was different at the very first moment it hit. I had repeated movements, couldn't get myself to stop moving my arm after I started moving it. My mind just went around in circles again and again and again. It was like I was just on, a loop. And so my body was on a loop. My mind was on a loop. I ended up going to the ER and they helped me to stop my seizure status, which was seizures happening again and again and again. And so I was able to stop the seizures, but then I went home and I slept for something like 48 hours, probably like more like 30 something hours afterwards. And from this point forward, my brain changed. And I was just a mess. I couldn't remember anything. I couldn't remember names. I had a really hard time recalling words. So it's kind of like that dementia type experience where you go to say something and as soon as you say it, it's gone. And that was really frustrating for me. It was really, really difficult for me to carry out simple tasks. And this obviously affected my everyday life. Another thing is that I started getting like ADHD type expressions, type feelings, type episodes. Like I was experiencing what it might be like to have ADHD, but I had never had ADHD before. So this was brand new for me. And I don't know, just things progressed and it sucked. I don't have anything else to say, but it sucked. And it wasn't long after I had that seizure status that I had another episode when I was in Colorado on a camping trip with my parents and my kids. So Andrew wasn't there. And this one was a little scarier because I was driving with my kids in the car and I started having another seizure, and I could tell it was like very similar to the seizure status type seizure that I had had before. And so I immediately call Andrew on the phone and I'm just kind of in panic mode. And I'm like, Andrew, I'm having a seizure right now and it's like the ones. And he told me to just pull over and there was no place to pull over. And the kids are like freaking out in the car because they can tell that I'm so worried and that I'm having a hard time. And so I go into this loop again. It wasn't as bad. And then I actually had heard that marijuana, THC, CBD in particular, had helped people to calm their seizures and to even stop them. Although at this point, I forgot this part of the story, I had seen another neurologist and I decided I was going to go see like the best of the best. So I went to like the research hospital at the U of U thinking, well, they're probably pushing for the latest and greatest. And when I went into that appointment, it was almost just as disappointing as the first neurology appointment that I went to, where they essentially said, we need to put you on some medication and there's nothing else we can do about it. There's nothing else you can do about it. So we're just going to put you on this medication and we're just going to increase it until your seizures go away. Now, there's nothing wrong with having medication to help you. I'm not going against that, but I don't love the idea of not being able to do anything else. I don't love the idea of here's the medication that you're going to take for the rest of your life. We're not going to go and research anything else that could possibly be affecting you. I do not like that idea. And it was really hard for me to hear that. So I was on a medication at this point. It was not working. And so we were in Colorado. We had access to some legal plant medicine. Maybe we want to call it that. Sometimes that's a softer term. I took some of that and my seizure stopped. When I had been experiencing seizure status, I didn't have to use any other medication to stop the seizures. I didn't have to go to an ER. I just used this natural plant to be able to help me. And my doctor, my neurologist, had said, I know a lot of people think that CBD, THC is helpful, but it's not. Don't even try it. It can actually, promote seizure activity. And so I didn't, but I had this in the back of my mind, like, I have heard that this works. And so I had that experience and I had this outcome where marijuana, it had THC and CBD in it, was actually very effective for me. And I am very grateful that we were in Colorado at that time where it was perfectly legal for me to consume that substance. And then I was able to go home, and despite, what my neurologist had said, I'm kind of a little bit of a rebel when it comes to physicians, but despite what he said, I ended up going and getting my medical marijuana card so that I could legally have something on hand in case that ever happened again. Because I was in the middle of Colorado with my kids in my car, and I was at a loss of what to do. It was extremely scary because just weeks before I had had that very difficult experience of having seizure status, and I just wanted something that I knew could support me if that happened again. I had absolutely no intention on taking it on a regular basis. It was more of not so much of a preventative type care. This was a just in case type care. Like I said, I do not want to be giving medical advice here. Please do not consider this medical advice. Please do consult a physician or, dive into your own intuition to see if this is for you. I simply want to share what works for me, and maybe it can help you to have courage simply to act, simply to move forward with those ideas or those things that you have heard, and have bravery in that. I'm not saying at all that marijuana, THC, or CBD is absolutely the way for you to move forward, but I am saying that it worked for me in this way. So I had now this substance, this plant medicine, this natural herb as kind of my backup. I was on medication, and we were still increasing the dosage to see if we could get the seizures to stop, because ultimately what I needed to do was I needed to get to a place where I wasn't having seizures anymore so that I could give my brain the opportunity to heal. Oh, it was actually, this is totally, not super important to the story, but when we were in Colorado and I had just had that episode, it was like the next day we were shopping around downtown, and I picked up this, I think what could be considered like a fidget toy. And I picked it up just in this toy shop that the kids and I were shopping in. And oh my gosh, it was so soothing to my brain. And for the first time, I understood fidget spinners or fidget toys, because I had never experienced ADHD type brain activity. And so when I picked up a fidget toy, I'm like, great, this is kind of fun to play with, but it's not needed. And they kind of became this fad. But I picked up that fidget toy and I was like, I am not walking out of this store without this toy. And I became like obsessed with them from that point forward. It was just, I don't even know the science behind why it works, but it was so soothing to my brain. So I had this medical marijuana backup. I had this not THC, that's medical marijuana. I was on Lamictal, and then I had my fidget spinner or fidget toy to soothe my brain when I needed it. Oh my gosh, I still just remember the immediate relief I had in my brain. Oh, so good. Oh. But things continued to progress. Things got really bad to the point where I could not function basically at all. The tiniest tasks were incredibly hard for me to complete. Doing laundry was so hard for me. Doing any kind of like meal planning, even just putting together the week's plan for what meals we were going to eat, aka meal planning. That was exhausting. And so I had to decide between what was the one thing I was going to do that day. Was I going to meal plan? Was I going to do the laundry? Was I going to do any kind of work? I could only choose one thing to do. I had crazy ADHD, so I would walk around the house trying to get a task done, and I would walk into one room, totally forget what I was doing, and get totally distracted and then start doing another thing. The other thing was there was incredible social anxiety because I wouldn't be able to remember their name, even if I had known them for a long time. And I wouldn't be able to remember what we had talked about the last time we had talked. And I'm somebody who has a love for deeply meaningful conversations, and I want to remember all those things about them, and I want to follow up. And I couldn't do that. And it was so hard for me. So I get to this point where my life is nothing like it was before. I mean, I used to edit videos all day with no issues. I used to be extremely productive. I could go all day. I was very efficient. I loved having those social conversations with people. I was able to retain information, probably not like the most amazing person in the world, but at least on a normal level. And I was a different person. And it got to the point where I had to quit my job because my job was video editing, and video editing is essentially making 1 trillion decisions in like a matter of seconds. And it was so exhausting that I could not do it. So I was extremely depressed until a friend called me, and she is a doTERRA, what they call a doTERRA wellness advocate. Now, if you don't know what doTERRA is, it's an MLM essentially that sells natural products. Basically, their main products are essential oils that are touted to be the cleanest, most pure essential oils on the market. And I have always considered these like a placebo effect. So, I had a collection of essential oils and knew about doTERRA, but this friend reached out to me and she was like, Laura, I have to tell you about this girl that I talked to. She has been having focal seizures every single day for a matter of months, and she started taking this product that doTERRA just released, and as soon as she took it, that very day, her seizures stopped. And every single day that she takes this product, she does not have a seizure. So she gave me this girl's phone number. She's like, I think you need to call her and get her story. I just want to pass this along just in case it's helpful for you. I call this girl and I'm just like, yo, I heard that you have seizures and that this product helped you. Can you tell me a little bit about it? And she had a story similar to mine where these seizures just started spontaneously. There was no accident or something that caused them. They were focal seizures, although hers were the unaware focal seizures where she just kind of like gets dazed and can't pay attention. Similar but different, and she was having them every single day. Well, after hearing her story, I figured, yeah, sure, like let's give this a try. And so I ordered their little like packets of powder is what it is. And it's called MetaPower Advantage. And it has collagen and NMN and a handful of other ingredients in there. And I started taking it. And I kid you not, 2 weeks later, I was almost the exact person, the exact brain functionality, cognitive ability as I was before I had started having seizures. It was night and day difference, and I got my life back. I have decided to make this podcast into a two-parter because it is really long and it is packed full of really good information that I want you to be able to digest. So next week we will release the second part of this two-part episode. If you're joining us when these have already been released, then if you want to, go ahead and listen to part 1 and part 2 back to back. Thank you so much for joining me on this transformative journey today. If you found this episode inspiring and thought-provoking, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share with someone in your life who's ready to embrace their own hero's journey. I don't know if you know this, but the SoulScript podcast is only one part of SoulScript. The other part is one-on-one coaching, where we rewrite and reignite your story. Oftentimes we think we have to go out and find ourselves when really I think it's returning to who we are. And that's what we would do together, is help you to return to the person that you have always been and release any conditioning that you have gathered along your life journey. So if you're interested in having some more support, you can schedule a session with me over at soulscriptstudio.com. I would love to work one-on-one with you. I can't wait to see you in person.